Imagine, just for a second, what it would be like to try and learn about the world before Google Street View.
Oh, right. Or before you could just, pull up endless 4K travel vlogs on your phone.
Exactly. Or even just searching an online encyclopedia to verify a fact. Put yourself in that headspace for a minute. Traveling to a distant land back then wasn't just a luxury. I mean, it was incredibly dangerous.
And rare. Most people never left their hometowns at all.
Yeah, so your entire understanding of the rest of the planet relied solely on the word of the very few people who actually survived a trip abroad. And, made it back to tell the tale.
And when those travelers returned, they essentially held a total monopoly on the truth. The very concept of evidence was completely different back then.
Right.
If a returning explorer or a respected historian told you something existed across the ocean, you had absolutely no mechanism to fact-check them. You simply had to take their word.
Or the word of the person who translated their account, which is even more complicated. But that monopoly on truth is the driving force behind our mission for today's deep dive.
Which is such a fun topic today.
It really is. We are unpacking a fascinating compilation of historical accounts from ancient explorers. And we're talking a wide range here, from Greek historians to Chinese missionaries.
Right. People who brought back stories of at least 10 bizarre peoples, tribes, and races that they absolutely swore, actually existed.
But our goal today isn't just to, read off a list of ancient monsters to you. We are going to deconstruct these historical texts to figure out the underlying mechanisms. Why were these wild stories told?
Exactly. Are we looking at genuine misunderstandings, outright lies, or, deep-seated reflections of the explorer's own biases?
Right.
Because the overarching psychological theme connecting all these ancient accounts is deeply human. When we encounter the unknown, our imaginations just abhor a vacuum.
Oh, they aggressively rush in to fill the blanks.
They really do. And often those blanks get populated by our deepest fears, our strangest assumptions, or our desperate need to make the unknown fit into our pre-existing worldview.
And those assumptions resulted in physical traits that just completely defy all biology. I mean, we are talking about faces and chests and people with giant umbrella feet.
Which we will definitely get into.
Oh, we will. But before we get to the anatomically impossible, we need to examine how this phenomenon started a bit closer to home. Because explorers didn't just invent monsters out of nowhere.
No. The most common starting point was weaponizing their own ignorance against people who were just culturally different.
Exactly. And the troglodytes are the perfect case study for this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Turning your neighbors into something monstrous is a tale as old as time. The Greek historian Herodotus is our main source here.
Right, the father of history.
Right. But we have to remember, his methods were essentially gathering hearsay and local legends.
Yeah, and according to Herodotus, the troglodytes lived on the borderlands between Egypt and Ethiopia. And he noted they were very fast runners, which, if you look at the source material, was literally the only nice thing he had to say about them.
Literally the only thing.
Yeah. He claims they completely shunned civilization, lived deep inside dark caves, and survived on a diet of only lizards and snakes.
Just lizards and snakes.
Right. But my absolute favorite detail is the language. He said they didn't know language at all and only communicated in bat-like squeals.
And see, that linguistic detail is the key to understanding the mechanism at play here. Herodotus wasn't describing literal bat people.
Right.
He was documenting an extremely prejudiced view of African natives. If you put yourself in his shoes, or his informant's shoes, you encounter a tribe. Their language utilizes sounds completely unfamiliar to your Greek ears.
Like tonal shifts or click consonants, maybe?
Exactly. And their diet utilizes local desert wildlife you aren't accustomed to eating. The prejudiced lens doesn't process that and say, oh, but a fascinating alternative culture.
No, it filters out the humanity entirely. It says they are uncivilized, they don't even have a language, they just squeal like bats. But let me push back on that a bit, or at least take it a step further. Because that prejudiced lens didn't just filter out humanity, it completely distorted physical reality when it came to gender, too.
You're talking about the Macles.
Yes, the Macles, or Macleans, of ancient Libya. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder wrote about them, and his account is where things get genuinely bizarre.
Very bizarre.
He claimed they were hermaphroditic. But he didn't just mean they had mixed traits. He claimed they were literally physically split vertically down the middle of their bodies.
Wow.
Yeah, with male characteristics on one side and female characteristics on the other.
The anatomical specificity of that visual is just jarring. half man, half woman, neatly divided down the center.
But the source material gives us a massive clue as to what is really going on here.
Yeah.
Because Herodotus had previously written about the exact same people, the Macleys, and he didn't mention a single weird thing about their physical appearance. The only noteworthy cultural trait Herodotus mentioned was that the Macleys women waged ritual battles against women from neighboring tribes to prove their virtue.
Fascinating.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Is Pliny doing this consciously? Because warfare was strictly a masculine endeavor in ancient Rome. So is Pliny assuming that any woman who fights must literally be half man? Is his brain just breaking at the concept?
Well, it's highly unlikely Pliny was consciously lying. It's actually more insidious than that. He just couldn't comprehend a society where women engaged in combat because it completely shattered his Roman cultural framework.
Right, because in Rome, the military was the ultimate expression of masculinity.
Exactly. His cultural blinders were so thick that he couldn't accept a female warrior as a natural phenomenon. To make sense of their aggressive, quote-unquote, masculine actions, his brain, and subsequently his writing, had to physically alter these women.
He literally grafted male anatomy onto them to explain their behavior.
He did.
Yeah.
It's a terrifyingly clear example of how powerful cultural biases are in shaping what we accept as objective reality.
Okay, so if cultural differences caused explorers' brains to invent these monstrous anatomical traits, what happened when they encountered an environment or a climate they couldn't comprehend?
Oh, that's where things get really fun.
Because reading through these texts, the geography and the weather seem to trigger biological adaptations that are utterly absurd.
Yeah, environmental myths operate on a fascinating pre-Darwinian logic. These explorers are trying to explain extreme foreign climates through biological adaptations, but, they're doing it with zero understanding of actual genetics or evolution.
The Cyapods, also known as the monopods, are the ultimate example of this. The ancient Greek traveler and physician Statesius claimed he met them during his travels in India.
The Cyapods.
He had only one leg, terminating in one absolutely ginormous foot.
Just one Bigfoot.
Just one. And Statesius swore they were incredibly agile, hopping around so fast that regular two-legged people couldn't catch them.
Naturally.
But the absolute peak of this myth is what they did when the Indian weather got too hot. Satishi says they would just lie on their backs, stick their one giant leg straight up into the air, and use their massive foot as a makeshift parasol to block the sun.
Which is, the visual is hilarious, but the underlying logic is what's truly compelling.
How so?
Well, Statesius goes to India, or speaks to travelers returning from India, and they experience a sweltering heat that is far more intense than anything back in the Mediterranean. So they return with a story of a creature biologically perfectly designed to survive that specific heat.
Oh, I see. And we see the exact same mechanism applied to cold climates with the Penati. Pliny the Elder wrote about them, claiming they lived on an island in the Black Sea. And the name of the island, All Ears Island.
You've got to be kidding me.
Nope. The Penati had ears so incredibly long that they drooped all the way down to their ankles. On cold nights, they would wrap themselves up in their own ears like built-in flesh blankets.
All Ears Island really makes you question the intent of the author, honestly. We really have to consider the epistemology of ancient texts here. Was Pliny the Elder treating this as rigorous science, or was this ancient infotainment?
Right.
Looking at accounts like the Penati, there's a strong argument that Pliny was essentially just trolling his readers. He was compiling an encyclopedia for the Roman elite, and he knew his audience craved entertaining, fantastical stories from the mysterious edges of the map. He just delivered what the market demanded.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. Looking at the Cyapods and the Penati, these aren't just biological mistakes. They sound like ancient Marvel superheroes tailored to specific climates.
Well, that's a great way to put it.
Right. The Cyapods have a built-in biological Swiss Army knife for the heat, and the Penati literally have built-in winter coats.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. It's an exaggerated mythological version of natural selection. They observed extreme environments and applied a logical fallacy. Like the weather is hyper-extreme, therefore the local people must have morphed into these hyper-specific, superpowered forms to survive it.
And to cap off these environmental extremes, we have the Ostomi. The Greek historian Megasthenes claimed they lived near the Ganges estuary in India, and their defining feature was that they had no mouths. None at all.
Wow.
None. They subsisted entirely on smells. They ate by sniffing fragrant roots, flowers, and fruit. But there was a deadly trade-off. Their noses were so sensitive that a single whiff of a bad smell could kill them instantly.
See, the Estomi highlight how ancient thinkers obsessed over the balance of the senses. An entire civilization sustained by aromatherapy, yet completely vulnerable to a bad odor.
Yeah.
It reflects a fear of invisible forces like miasma or bad air, which they believed caused disease taken to an evolutionary extreme.
But that logic immediately hits a wall for me.
How so?
Well, if I'm an ancient Roman patrician sitting in a bathhouse listening to Pliny tell me about umbrella-footed hopping men or people who eat by smelling apples, my very first question is going to be, cool, show me one. Like, if these incredible people actually existed, why didn't any of these wealthy, sponsored explorers just bring one back to Rome or Greece to prove it?
And that is the structural flaw in every one of these tall tales. To get away with these stories, the explorers had to invent brilliant, built-in geographical excuses.
Right.
They engineered narratives that made it physically impossible for their wealthy patrons to verify the claims.
The Aberamon are the textbook example of this tactic. According to Pliny, the Aberamon were a majestic tribe living in a secluded, hidden valley in India. They had 2 legs, but their feet and knees pointed entirely backward.
Right.
And despite this, they ran at incredible speeds, and they were ferocious fighters who aggressively defended their valley. But here is the most convenient detail ever recorded in ancient history.
Here we go.
Pliny claimed that the valley had special air. If an Aberamon breathed regular air from anywhere else, they would instantly suffocate.
It's just the perfect, unfalsifiable claim. You can't verify the Aberamon yourself because you can't get past their ferocious warriors into the hidden valley. And the explorer can't bring an Aberamon out of the valley to show you because the change in air quality would kill the specimen.
So what does this all mean? Pliny is basically using the ancient equivalent of the dog ate my homework. He can't bring an Aberamon to Rome because of the air. How incredibly convenient.
Very convenient.
Are we to assume these guys were just con artists?
Well, some were certainly embellishing for fame or patronage. Geography literally becomes the alibi. By placing these tribes in hostile valleys across treacherous oceans or behind unbreathable air, the storyteller protects themselves from scrutiny. And we see this exact same tactic used across different cultures and eras.
Let's jump forward to the year 450 and look at the Chinese missionary Huishan to see that exact tactic in play. He sailed far east into unknown lands. Some modern historians think maybe he reached the Americas or a distant Pacific island, and he came back 40 years later with stories of peaceful, rich kingdoms. But the most bizarre was Neredko. He claimed this was a kingdom entirely made up of women. They had beautiful faces, but their bodies were completely covered in hair, and naturally they would run and hide if they ever saw a man.
Which conveniently explains why it's so hard for any other male explorer to find them.
Exactly. The details of Neredko are wild. If a woman there wanted a baby, she didn't need a man. She just waded into a specific body of water and waited until she conceived.
Wow.
Yeah, and they also didn't have nipples. Instead, they grew special hairs on their necks that oozed a kind of juice, and the babies would drink this neck juice for 100 days until they could walk.
Notice the storytelling architecture Huishan uses here. It's wildly imaginative, almost hallucinatory.
Totally.
But look at what he does at the very end of his account. He adds an incredibly grounded, mundane detail about their diet. He notes that once these women grew up, they loved eating pungent, pickled vegetables.
Pickled vegetables. After all the magical water babies and neck juice, he throws in pickled vegetables. I mean, I don't understand how that fits.
Oh, it fits perfectly if you understand the psychology of deception. Adding a mundane, relatable detail like pickled vegetables suddenly anchors the fantastical story.
Oh, I see.
It makes the listener think, well, if he's making it up, why would he include something so boring? It's a classic trick to manufacture authenticity.
Wow.
And just like Pliny's secluded valley, Huishan's ultimate excuse is the sheer distance. I mean, he traveled for 40 years. Neredko is protected by an ocean of travel time, making it virtually impossible for anyone back home to mount an expedition to verify his claims.
You would think, though, that as the world modernized, as ships got better and cartography improved, these stories would just fade away. Like, eventually, someone sails to India or Africa, looks around, realizes nobody has umbrella feet or backward knees, and the myths die out.
That is the logical assumption. But what is truly staggering about these texts is how deeply these specific myths infected the age of discovery.
Really?
They didn't fade away. They were treated as established facts that crossed centuries and oceans.
Okay, let's track one of these persistent myths. We can start with the Arimaspi. This was a one-eyed, warlike people in Eastern Europe described by the poet Aristides. Very similar to the Greek Cyclops, they had one eye right in the middle of their face, and they were in a state of constant war with their neighbors for some totally unspecified reason. It's the classic trope of the savage, dangerous outsider.
Right, and that trope of the savage outsider morphed, but never really vanished. It evolved into perhaps the most persistent myth of all the dog-headed people.
The cynocephaly. This myth started with the ancient Greek doctor Lutetius, who placed them somewhere in India or Southeast Asia. Most accounts said they were savage and barbaric. They could understand human speech but couldn't speak themselves, communicating only in barks.
Right.
Some later accounts upgraded them, saying they had a very rich, respectable kingdom. But the crazy part is that this myth was so ingrained that Marco Polo, centuries later, claimed they actually existed.
I mean, Marco Polo, one of the most famous explorers in history, is out there confirming a myth from ancient Greece. But we have to ask how that happens.
And the how gets even more concerning when Christopher Columbus enters the chat.
Oh, yes.
Columbus himself claimed that the Tano Native Americans were totally familiar with the dog-headed cynocephaly. He has essentially carried this ancient Greek myth across the Atlantic Ocean to the Caribbean. How is that even possible? Are they just lying?
It's not necessarily a conscious lie. It's actually a catastrophic failure of translation, fueled by confirmation bias.
Okay.
Think about the mechanism here. Columbus isn't sailing into the unknown with a blank slate. He is desperate to prove he has reached Asia. He literally has Marco Polo's accounts annotated in his cabin.
Wow.
He expects to find dog-headed men because Marco Polo said they were near Asia. When Columbus arrives, he tries to communicate with the Taino people. The Taino might be warning him about a fierce neighboring tribe, perhaps the Caribs, who they say are dangerous. Columbus's biased brain filters that broken translation through his expectations. He hears fierce enemies, and his brain translates it to, the dog-headed men of Marco Polo. I must be in Asia. He finds what he's looking for because he refuses to see anything else.
That makes so much sense, and it perfectly explains the deepest dive of all the blemmies, also known as the acephaloi. These were the headless people with their facial features jutting out of their chests. Herodotus mentioned them first in Africa, but this myth survived all the way to the 16th century.
It's incredible.
Sir Walter Raleigh, the famous English explorer, explicitly claimed to have seen these headless people. He called them the Iwapanoma and swore they were living in what is modern-day Venezuela.
Sir Walter Raleigh hallucinating headless men in South America is just a stunning example of the power of expectation overriding sensory input.
Wait, Columbus and Raleigh? I am still blown away by this. It's not just a bad game of telephone that lasted 2 millennia. They were literally treating a 1,000-year-old fictional guidebook as a map of reality. They completely projected ancient Greek myths onto the indigenous populations of South America.
And that is the ultimate danger of confirmation bias, and why critical thinking is a survival skill, not just an academic exercise.
Yeah.
If you believe strongly enough that headless men with chest faces live at the edges of the world, then when you reach the edge of the world, your brain will find a way to see them.
Right.
You might see an indigenous warrior with his head ducked behind a large shield painted with a face. Or you might hear an exaggerated local metaphor, and instead of investigating, you accept it as absolute proof of the myth you brought with you. Even the most famous, seemingly rational explorers of their day fell victim to it. Their expectations entirely rewrote their reality.
That is quite the journey we've taken today for you, the listener. We've gone from the prejudiced misinterpretations of the troglodytes in their caves, and Pliny physically dividing the Macles warrior women to protect his Roman sensibilities.
Yep.
We looked at the bizarre biological weather umbrellas of the Cyapods and the Panati, driven by a total misunderstanding of extreme climates, all the way to Sir Walter Raleigh hallucinating headless people in the jungles of Venezuela just because a Greek historian wrote about them thousands of years earlier.
The crucial takeaway from this deep dive is that these ancient texts are far more than just funny historical footnotes. They really serve as a mirror. They reflect exactly how deeply human expectations, prejudices, and fears shape the reality we perceive.
Absolutely.
Whenever we encounter something or someone entirely new, our default setting is to project our own internal world onto that external unknown.
And that leaves you with something really important to think about. We've seen how a real foreign language was confidently written off as bet squeals, and how entire geographic regions were filled with mythical dog-headed people just because the map was blank and the explorer needed an excuse. Now bring yourself back to today. Think about our modern world of instant global news and algorithmic feeds. As you scroll through media today, reading about distant cultures or isolated events, or people you've never personally met or witnessed, ask yourself, what dog-headed myths are we currently believing right now, simply because a trusted modern explorer confidently told us they exist?